What is up, everybody? Glad to have you here. I have got Christian HASKER, Chief Marketing Officer, previously at Hedera. I know still working within the Hedera ecosystem, now at Swirlds. So it's great to see you again, Christian, by the way. It's been too long, I think.
Likewise, yeah, it's been a minute here.
How's everything been going?
I mean, like you, it's constant. We're in the tsunami.
I know we're in a time crunch, and I know, my audience knows that I like to kind of just get straight to the point. So like I said, I spent not way too long, but I spent about 7 hours today going through this questions list. So I've got about 4 pages. So Christian has given me the heads up if we start going down the rabbit hole of things, because I want to get through all these questions. So I want to start, and can I guess what I want to ask is, can you just give a brief overview of the network services that Hedera offers? In comparison to what we see with Bitcoin and these other things, like what are the services within Hedera Hashgraph? How do those services benefit network users, and what is the value role that hBAR plays within that ecosystem of services?
Cool, yes. And since we last spoke, we brought a new service to market as well. So there are 3 services that sit on top of Hedera that are exposed to developers to build on the network. The first is the Hedera consensus service. Hedera is powered by the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. So the Hedera consensus service exposes this amazing consensus algorithm to developers where you can build whatever you want to build using the consensus service. Then we have the Hedera token service. So think of that if you want to mint either a fungible or a non-fungible token and transact that really fast and very cheap, predictable, low cost, you use the Hedera token service. And then earlier this year, all the months blur, so I don't know exactly when it was, but earlier this year, we brought the smart contract service to Hedera. That is a scalable, EVM compatible smart contract service. So it's written in Solidity. It's much faster than what you get on Ethereum. It's much lower cost than Ethereum with predictable fees. And it can be used in conjunction with those other 2 services to, really unleash a whole host of new applications. So if you and I mint a token on other networks, you have to do that within the smart contract service. And everything lives inside the smart contract, the account balances, all of that. So you've got to constantly update the smart contract. The state size grows bigger, gets more expensive. Whereas in Hedera, you can segment these workloads. We can mint a token. You and I can transact it super fast, super low cost. But if we need full programmability on chain to do things with that token, then you invoke the smart contract service, but you only need to invoke it when you need to invoke it. So I think maybe I answered most of your questions.
No, that's fantastic. I appreciate it. And I did, we do know that EVM compatibility is obviously one of the newer features as a service within Hedera, which is, I think, fantastic. One of the things that we've also seen recently, the announcement in January that the Hedera governing board voted to purchase the Hashgraph IP, or intellectual property, to open source and further decentralize the network. So for me, what value does Hedera see in decentralizing the network? Can you touch base on the current state of decentralization and future milestones in decentralization, and what timeline you would expect to achieve some of those milestones that I know that you guys have? So.
Okay, perfect. So yes, to recap, it used to be that the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, the intellectual property, the patent for that algorithm was owned by Swirlds, which was the creator of Hashgraph and the original governing council member, the founding governing council member of Hedera. The council purchased the intellectual property and later this year will open source Hashgraph, really because we are in an industry, when you start this out years and years ago, you have a certain thesis and then you watch the market and, different things change. So the consensus algorithm was patented and something called open review, where a developer could take the algorithm and compile the code, but not use it in an application. Mm-hmm. that was done to ensure that the Hedera network itself could never split, could never fork. But there are now other controls in place, technical controls, where you no longer need these legal controls. Mm-hmm. So the decision to open source Hashgraph will make it where any developer can take Hashgraph and use it in an application, a centralized application or a decentralized application. Now, if you need to integrate one Hashgraph-based application with another Hashgraph-based application so that they can talk to each other and transact with one another, you can do that just so easily through Hedera itself. So we believe that open sourcing Hashgraph would just proliferate the number of opportunities for Hedera down the road. So important milestone for decentralization. You talked about other milestones along the way. So Dr. Lima Baird, who's the inventor of Hashgraph consensus algorithm, co-founder of Hedera, co-founder of Swirlds, he articulated 3 phases to full decentralization. The first phase was bootstrapping the network itself and building out our decentralized governance, which is this group of global organizations that come together for the greater good of stewarding the network. They run the nodes on the network initially. And while it started relatively decentralized with nodes around the world and a high trust model, the next phase is the one that we're about to move into, where community members will be able to run nodes in the Hedera network as well. So you also mentioned about, I'm now at Swirlds. So that is in the beginning of this new chapter of decentralization. We bootstrap the network. It's all good now. So I used to be 3 weeks ago at Hedera, and now I'm working at Swirlds for the Hedera ecosystem. This then, and I know I saw on Twitter, you got some questions about Swirlds, so I won't go into it now. But now we're a community member and there will be community nodes. And then the third phase, full decentralization, is when anyone in the world can run a node, permissionless node on the network. You add a node, you drop a node, there will be multiple shards. Rough timing, community nodes by the end of this year looks, possible.
That was going to be a question. Thank you.
and then permissionless nodes. Candidly, I think we're years away, because permissionless nodes will not be needed until we're in a multi-sharded environment. Mm-hmm. And because Hedera can process so many transactions within a single shard, we're probably not going to need to go to shards for, I don't know, pick a year, 3 years, something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I saw you started going down the community nodes path, and I think you stopped yourself to talk about timeframes, but end of the year, fantastic, and thank you. I guess with the announcement of decentralizing the network, many Hedera employees moving into positions with Swirlds. So I guess before we get into the meat and potatoes of this interview here, what are some of the pros, and if any, what are some of the cons that employees that previously were within Hedera and are now working at Swirlds are now facing? And I guess you can really only answer that from yourself. Is there a big difference from being with Hedera at CMO versus working back at Swirlds, or what are you seeing? What do you like? If there's things that you don't like that you want to make a little bit better, how do you see that happening? So
I only see pros. There really are no downsides, other than a little bit of ego where it was super cool to work for Hedera and have the Hedera brand and all of that stuff. Yeah. And build that brand up. So I have a little bit of a sense of loss over that, and I know some other employees feel the same way. Yep. But the opportunity at Swirlds Labs is so cool, because we go from having a lot of parameters around what we can and cannot do within Hedera itself, to now being a community member. We are a community member contributing to the Hedera ecosystem, whether that's from product, whether that's from engineering, whether that's from marketing. So we now get to wear a different hat and really be part of this thing and figure out, how do we accelerate it? So we now wake up in the morning saying, okay, we achieved this really cool thing where we got the network up and running. It's working as advertised, right? The technology works great. The governance works great. The network is, performing. So now, how do we turbocharge this ecosystem? So at Hedera, for example, there was a wall between Hedera and the hBAR Foundation, very deliberately so. But now as a community member, I can engage with the hBAR Foundation just like other community members can. So I wore one hat at Hedera, and now I feel like I can wear multiple hats. And then Swirlds can build products that we weren't able to build at Hedera, because Hedera is just this network layer. And then you need things on top of the network to make it easier for people to build. And we get to do that now at Swirlds. So it's going to be very cool figuring that out. And we're early days, stay tuned for more, but I'm excited by that.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I will say, I have to give a kudos and congratulations to the network expansion. Whenever we last spoke, it was July 25th, 2020. That was our interview. At that time, the governing council member consisted of 15 organizations. Those organizations were Avery Dennison, Boeing, Deutsche Telekom, DLA Piper. Bear with me, I'm not going to lose my breath. Fidelity Information Services, Google, IBM, LG, Magalu, Nomura, Swirlds, Tata Communications, UCL, Wipro, and Zane. Since that time, and this is a little under 2 years, there have been 11 new council members that have been announced. Chainlink, DBS, who I believe is the largest investment bank in Southeast Asia, Denton's, EDF, FPOS, which is the ACH system in Australia. Given the use case, it's also New Zealand, but I think there's a separation there. We'll get into that in a second. IIT Madras, LSE, ServiceNow, Shinhan, Standard Bank, and Ubisoft. I guess the question that I have is, we've seen 11 more over the previous 2 years. We know you're at 26, and we know that there's 39 governing council members that are going to eventually be announced. And I'm certain, just from a common sense standpoint, there's got to be some under NDA right now. When would you expect to maybe see some announcements about some new governing council members within the Hedera ecosystem?
So if I could rewind to, what was it, July 2020?
July 25th, yeah, 2020. So.
So nearly 2 years ago, I would have told you that by this time this year, we'd be at 39. I really would have believed that. So it is going more slowly than I would have guessed back then. But it is going more slowly and deliberately now from a governing council perspective. So back then, Swirlds was responsible for recruiting and nominating the new raft of governing council members. Mm-hmm. But remember, since then, the governing council has really started to take ownership and govern the network itself. So now there's something called a membership committee, MEMCOM, and MEMCOM is staffed by representatives from the governing council members themselves. Mm-hmm. And they are really taking a hard look at the types of companies that we don't have representation from yet at Hedera, leveraging their personal networks, their customer bases in some cases, to recruit the remaining, 13, right? So when, I don't know, there's a bunch that I know of in the pipeline that I get excited when I hear talk of them, but until they ink the deal, you know how these things are. Yeah. Who knows? But I am excited. I'm not going to give any time frames. What I will say is 26 is enough to be, very decentralized already. And geographically and by industry, we're doing pretty well. So I don't think the council feels any urgency or rush to just give out the remaining 13 slots. They really want to take their time and do it right.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. Kind of leading on from that, it's been very interesting to watch timelines within some of the governing council members. So I can think back when we talked about FTPOS, and when we were talking about FTPOS in 2020, I think it had just been announced that there was a proof of concept that was going to be utilizing Hedera services to build out ecosystems within micropayments and trial that. Obviously, that was a success because after that, they joined the governing board. And I've seen some documents recently with especially some redacted things within those documents that basically talks about settlement infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But there's some redacted stuff in there. We have DLA Piper, et cetera, as well. So I guess the lead in from all of that and talking about timelines, from all the governing board members that have publicly announced use cases with services within Hedera, those 3 use cases that you talked about, or 3 platform services, which of those is most exciting for you and why from what we're seeing so far with the announced use cases? So DLA Piper, we've got Toko and FTPOS and Avery.
Yeah, so oh gosh, I don't want to offend anyone. So I think last week at Knowledge 2022, which is ServiceNow's conference, ServiceNow presented with DLA Piper around a joint application which is being productionized, or may even have been productionized as we speak. And that is the ability for, if you think about an organization, a company like DLA Piper, where they have lawyers all over the world, and they have to have very sophisticated internal chargeback systems. Mm-hmm. So, this business unit charges this business unit. How do you account? Lawyers always charge by the 20-minute increment, right? So there's a lot of this tracking that has to happen. So DLA Piper and ServiceNow have joined together to solve a problem of real-time chargeback settlement within DLA Piper itself. And then ServiceNow will roll that out to other customers. And ServiceNow is doing really cool things around carbon offset and sustainability and building that into their Now platform. So I get excited about that because ServiceNow, while not one of those sexy hot names in the industry, every enterprise on the planet uses ServiceNow, right? It just runs the internals of every company out there. So the reach is going to be tremendous. I'm also super excited about, you mentioned Avery Dennison. So they integrated their Atma.io platform with Hedera, but it used to be where it was an option that customers had to turn on and request. Mm-hmm. And Atma is a supply chain track and trace platform where everything gets a digital fingerprint on Atma and then traces it through the supply chain. That is now, Hedera is now the de facto standard for that. That should be coming online here imminently, by the way. That's cross fingers.
And they use both the Hedera consensus and Hedera token service, I believe. And I know they deal heavily in RFID. 6 of the top.
And you're going to be able to offset the carbon footprint, again, sustainably through Atma of the supply chain as well. So that one is freaking cool. And then you mentioned the finance stuff. I think the finance stuff is really interesting, but to retrofit the actual financial system of the globe is just going to take time. I mean, that is going to take a long time.
Just a little bit.
So I do see those as being more proofs of concept, and then they will figure out where to do real world tests. So I know Standard Bank, being in Africa, there's a whole population that is unbanked. Yep. So they can do some of these real world tests with an unbanked population, where, maybe taking a little bit more time for things that are a bit more global in nature.
Yeah, and you mentioned ServiceNow, kind of seeing enough synergy within DLA Piper to kind of mesh together. We know they're both board members. I'll lead into that maybe within a future question, but I've seen similar things. There's been interesting announcements that seem to tie in different governing board participants with certain initiatives. So leading on from that, and maybe bear with me here because it's not a paragraph, but given the fact that we haven't seen every proof of concept or every use case being built out from governing board members, I have here written, one could assume that all the governing council members are building out use cases on Hedera. Can you confirm that those assumptions are reasonably correct? And if so, what role would the underlying asset within the network, which would be hBAR, play in these ecosystems? When can we see or expect to see, or are there any close announcements of use cases coming out from governing board members that haven't directly announced yet, like Google, for example, some of the other platforms that or industry participants that within the governing board? Are we going to see anything you think maybe 2022 within some of the governing board members that we haven't seen yet?
I hope so. I'll answer your first one. It is not a good assumption to assume that every council member is building on the network.
Okay.
I would say the earlier council members, certainly the first 5, the primary reason for them joining was to get a ringside view of this emerging market with a great technology and new governance model, and to really take their time to figure out what they wanted to do in the space as far as building. Mm-hmm. However, I talked about the membership committee earlier and some of what is changing. And some of what is changing is the governing council members want new governing council members to have an identified application on the network prior to becoming a governing council member. And then there's this other committee called Corporate Committee, where use cases get discussed around governing council members themselves. Because one of the promises of decentralization is that you get competitive companies who maybe don't trust each other because they're trying to win their market to actually cooperate with one another in this trusted manner. So I've attended 3 now of these CorpCom meetings, and the use cases that are being discussed within CorpCom are freaking amazing. I mean, I can't wait to tell the world about some of these, because I just get to listen in, and it's council members talking to council members about how to solve real business problems, like the one I talked about with DLA Piper, right? If DLA Piper couldn't work with ServiceNow, that would be a problem that went unsolved. So who knows when this, I've given up predicting when we're going to announce announcements. And I know the community gets pretty fed up with sort of over-promising and under-delivering. So I'm really taking that on board. And when things are ready, we'll announce them. And when they're not, we won't.
I appreciate that. And I think that that's probably a smart move. I had, I won't ask you to answer this, but are there proof of concepts currently ongoing under NDA? I'm sure that that's a yes, but I don't want to get into that.
Yes, so many.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit because I really do want to try to get through everything here. And I know you've got about 30 minutes left. Green initiatives, I guess, let me kind of run through the pretense of this. So from within Hedera's website, obviously, you guys estimate a $200 billion carbon market by 2030. I think that time frame is not by mistake, because we see lots of global initiatives surrounding themselves around green finance, sustainability, ESG by that 2030 time frame. So network growth and sustainability from a green initiative standpoint is important to Hedera, given the launch of a $100 million Sustainable Impact Fund back in March. Can you touch on some of those green initiatives that you're excited about / partnerships? Maybe Dovu, maybe you touched on Avery Dennison, but Dovu being the fact that they were the first grant recipient. And I guess to extrapolate out from there, how important do you see this space, this asset class, these networks How do you see them surviving if they're just not inherently green and they don't plan to adapt to that fact within a handful of years or by 2030? So.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. And Hedera will win this market. I have no doubt about it. For two reasons. One is Hashgraph is at the bounds of what is mathematically possible from an efficiency standpoint. So other networks may be able to approximate the carbon footprint of Hedera, but not beat it for sure. And so Hedera has a massive head start. The $100 million Sustainable Initiative Fund was, I think it may be still the only one. It certainly was when it was announced, the only one in the DLT market. Mm-hmm. Every enterprise on the planet has a sustainability initiative underway.
Yep.
And very soon they're going to get regulated, right? They will have to prove this out. Carbon offsets and carbon token trading is a classic double spend problem. Why it doesn't work today in a centralized manner is I can sell you a carbon offset and then I can turn around and sell someone else a carbon offset that's the exact same thing. And you have no way to audit that, right? You just have to trust me as a centralized player. So it is rife with fraud, poor accounting. Do those carbon sinks actually exist? Mm-hmm. You know, you talk about things in the Amazon, for example. Can you go and view this carbon sink? Is it actually there?
Yep.
So all of this needs to be audited on a public network. You talked about Dovu being the first recipient. They're very far along in this process because they validate, they use soil, which is an amazing carbon sink, apparently. Who knew? I didn't know. I mean, they knew, obviously. But soil farmers to actually authenticate that they're sequestering this amount of carbon on the network. Then they have a token that you can participate in this economy and offset carbon footprints. So they're really at the vanguard of what's possible. But then there's this open source Guardian network that's being built on top of Hedera, which makes it so easy for other applications to just link into Hedera as the underlying ledger and build some of these very cool applications. So yeah, I mean, by 2030, who knows, maybe it'll be bigger than $200 billion market. But I do believe Hedera will own that market.
What do you think in regards to consensus mechanisms that might not be able to adapt or adjust towards sustainability models as far as ESG is
I think they're going to get regulated away. I mean, we saw Europe, right, just earlier this year, just bring up the question, should they legislate proof of work cryptocurrencies from a sustainability standpoint? Mm-hmm. And then they backed off of that, and understandably so as well. I don't think Bitcoin's going anywhere, but I do think Bitcoin will have to prove out that it is using sustainable electricity at a minimum.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fascinating. And funnily enough, there is an oil and gas producer who uses flare gas to mine Bitcoin, and they are auditing all of that on Hedera. So that's kind of cool. Wow. That Hedera could be used to prove that other networks are sustainable when they claim to be sustainable as well.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I don't want to stay on the green finance stuff too long, but just one point that I saw, and this was probably a year ago, maybe even a little bit longer, talking about Hedera being carbon negative, right? But then if you actually read the article, the network is so efficient that like the only carbon credits that needed to be bought back were for like 3 vehicles.
It's like $26, I think it cost or something. It was crazy.
Yeah, just a sidebar. So I want to shift discussions towards.
But by the way, talking about legislation, I think you and I will have to offset our carbon footprint in the future as well. Goods that we buy, there'll be a little option at checkout, right? Offset your carbon footprint. I believe Hedera is going to power all of that. So It just boggles the mind how big that market's going to be.
Well, thank you, Christian. I appreciate the answer. I want to shift to discussions around central bank digital currencies and CBDCs. I guess as a broader question, when do you expect that we really start seeing CBDCs begin rolling out? And I guess just begin rolling out on a mass scale. My opinion is kind of that between 2024 and 2026, maybe through some more exotic nations, or do you think it's going to be further out? And I guess what would be the thought process around that? And then I'm going to dive a little bit more into some of the Hedera.
No, I think you're probably right on that rough time frame for very small countries that don't have great existing infrastructure, because you're going to gain efficiencies by running on public infrastructure. So that feels right to me. 2023, probably hear about some of those plans for 2024 through 2026. I think that's accurate. The larger countries, I think it's going to take some time.
Yep.
They're very risk averse. They have nothing to gain and potentially things to lose. So I think they're just going to take it very, very slowly and pragmatically.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of talk around systemic risk and things like that. And given that this space is still relatively small compared to the global economy, I mean, $2.6 trillion was what the market cap of cryptos hit. That's a drop in the bucket, as I think we all know. So the questions that I have,
I wish it was still 2.6 trillion.
I think we all do. It's been a rough handful of months here. Okay, so we do know that Project New Dawn, which MTech has shifted around their website a little bit, but is a collaborative effort between Microsoft, MTech, Hedera, Hashgraph, and that they're working with the Federal Reserve as well. Can you provide any updates to this CBDC initiative? Is it still ongoing with MTech? The last, I think, thing that I saw was probably a handful of months ago in a PDF form, but that's still ongoing.
Yeah, Zenobia just recorded a podcast with Carmel, who's the CEO and co-founder of MTech, and where she provides some updates around the CBDC sandbox. And what that is, it's a set of tooling with Hedera as the distributed ledger technology, but a bunch of stuff around it that, these central banks can actually play around of what a CBDC would look like. So it's a cool initiative. I know she is highly engaged in some smaller nations like I talked about. And I'm excited for what they're doing. And I think she's going to be very successful as well. I mean, I think she's so early into a market that if she has the patience to hang in there, is really going to reward that sort of foresight.
I was doing some digging today as well, and I think I found that there's a guy, Credible Crypto, on Twitter too. I found that he had done the same digging as me in the past. So I'll talk about timelines again. 2 governing board members, Standard Bank and Shinhan, trialing Hedera for cross-border stablecoin payments in November of last year. But previous and prior to that, Shinhan had ran a proof of concept for a CBDC platform with a subsidiary of LG. LG is obviously also a governing member. That CBDC platform was with LG CNS. We don't have definitive proof that Hedera was used in that earlier trial, but some of us like to connect the dots. I guess this leads back into like when you see governing board members announcing DLT initiatives. I don't know, you're not going to answer this. If we see them announcing like different initiatives across the space in DLT, is Hedera always kind of an option that could potentially be utilized within these? Like, if you connect enough dots, are we going to be able to potentially find some sort of integration, or is it just kind of dot connecting for the sake of dot connecting, especially within that Shinhan and LG CNS?
I think that one was dot connecting for the sake of dot connecting, because LG is massive, massive. And LG Electronics is the governing council member. So there's LG Group, and then there's LG Electronics. But when you see something like Shinhan Bank and Standard Bank teaming up, then of course, connect all the dots you want there. But then other times I've seen dots that have been connected where I'm like, ooh, they did some digging and they really found that. So I'd say it's not always the case just because you see a top line name. We're in LG Electronics. Of course, the LG Electronics group wants to proliferate Hedera throughout other groups of LG. So just because it may not be true today doesn't mean it won't be true in the future, but I would caution against always connecting those dots.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's actually, it's funny. It's the way that I found out that you guys were partnered with Alliance Block. Because for some reason I was digging through GitHub because I'm an insane person, and I found that
GitHub's a good place because you've got real developers doing code. Yeah,
LimeChain, it was the same dev working on both projects, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I guess to leave off the CBDC discussion, you probably could provide any insight as to, are we going to be seeing some more initiatives announced around CBDCs and Hedera maybe this year? Is there stuff in the pipeline that we don't know about yet? Which is probably, of course, a yes, but should we be expect to potentially be seeing anything publicly, maybe 2022, some other initiatives?
I don't know about public announcements, but it was DC Blockchain Week last week, was that? The weeks all blur together. And we had a presence there. Carmel was there as well. And, we're starting to, on the Hedera side of things, do more around government relations type activities. We also were in Davos as well, which is the World Economic Forum, where a lot of these discussions start to happen and you need to be on the radar. But I think they are going to go slowly with like major announcements, because what does a country have to gain by making something public? Nothing, zero. Now, where I think we'll see faster acceleration is around stablecoins and banks using stablecoins in interesting ways. So you talked about that real-time settlement. That solves a real problem, that the SWIFT system is too slow, it's too expensive. So things like that, I think, will move a lot faster because it's really addressing a consumer need. And if you can allay all the concerns around security and putting funds at risk, I see no reason why that won't move along more quickly.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Moving forward with ecosystem initiatives, I think we have 20 minutes here. I'm going to try to get through these because I think the end of this is pretty good. Back in September of last year, there was a $5 billion in USD worth of hBAR allocated to the hBAR Foundation. Currently, only 203 million of that 5 billion has been given out in grants to 71 different initiatives. And this is going to lead us into, do you expect the number of projects receiving grants to increase when we see more interoperability mechanisms such as Hedera Improvement Proposal 410 and 415, which would create Hedera Improvement Proposal 482, enabling kind of that interoperability with, the MetaMask signing and all the things that we're expecting to see from tool sets? How do you see those grants being divvied out? Is that kind of is that a benchmark for no end date in sight for where those grants go and just allocating in the correct way? And then on top of where you see grants going, can you touch base on kind of the JSON RPC, the HIP 482, the MetaMask, all of that, because I think that's probably the biggest announcement that I've seen in the past couple of months. So.
Yeah, okay, so I'll take those separately. So the hBAR Foundation was only announced last September, as you said, and it takes a while to operationalize anything. They have a very interesting setup around where they're going to place bets. There are 4 funds. There's the Crypto Economy Fund. So still today, there isn't too much to do with your hBAR, right? And they've made some progress there with things like Stata Labs. And I think you're going to see DeFi protocols and different marketplaces and cool things that you can do with your hBAR, like you can with other cryptocurrencies on other networks. Then they have the Sustainability Initiative Fund that we talked about. That's making early bets, I think, to win an entire market. So, that's going to take a little while to come to fruition. There's a Metaverse Fund, which is, around gaming and NFTs and things like that, we're super hot, and we're seeing that deflate a little bit. And I think that's the best thing, because in this sort of deflation of that bubble, NFTs are amazing and they're not going anywhere. But the real utility story behind NFTs is going to emerge from that. So, I think that fund and placing some strategic bets there is really good. And then the last one is, I think, payments, right? FinTech and payments, where you're going to see, like we just talked about, real-time settlement. You've got to build out an ecosystem around that. So I do think it's going to take, I think the way the hBAR Foundation thinks about it is there are short-term strategic bets that'll pay off more quickly here, and then longer term. And then they have to think about the fund that they have. It was worth 5 billion and now it's not worth 5 billion. They have to make that last for a long time. So while you heard these headline figures of $100 million or $250 million, they're going to take their time and really make sure that capital is deployed in a very sensible way that really builds out the overall Hedera ecosystem is to the benefit of all of us. And then Jason, RPC. So Hedera is completely unique in the market. It is not a blockchain, right? So we now have EVM compatible smart contracts on Hedera. That's great. But in order to attract developers over to Hedera, you have to make it as easy as possible for them. And they all have their standard tooling. They use Hardhat and Truffle, and they have their different tests and MetaMask. And so if you don't play in that sandbox, you're just making your barrier to entry a little bit higher. So the technical committee, product and engineering, takes a hard look at not just the features and functionality, but the tooling around this to make it possible. And we talked about Swirlds Labs a little bit. Swirlds Labs can fill this gap now as well. And if you're making it where you can, in MetaMask, point at Hedera as a network, deploy your smart contract over there, then it's just lowering that barrier to adoption. And I do think this sort of interoperability is a key tenet that's just going to move us forward a lot more quickly, because once you're on Hedera and you're transacting super fast with finality and low fees, why not stay, right? Come and try it and stay. And I think we're going to see that. We're early days yet.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people misinterpret sometimes that Ethereum, I don't think Ethereum goes anywhere in the short term, but they have a 7-year head start. Once you start integrating user experience and what people are used to into a network with higher efficiency and utility, it will be very interesting to watch what happens from my stance. The $250 million Metaverse Fund was announced on April 7th with Hedera, and then governing board member DBS, which is the largest bank in Southeast Asia, just completely by coincidence announces that they're exploring Metaverse on April 8th. I just have that as a note. I thought that the timing was interesting. Can you touch base a little bit more? One more question on NFTs, and then I want to kind of do a 10-minute rapid fire for community questions and try to get through.
All right, do it.
So the NFT question that I have, and you kind of led me into it anyways. How do you see the landscape continuing to grow with art-based and non-art-based projects? Because what NFTs really represent to, like, at scale, to me, we deal with digital ID, we deal with records management, carbon credits initiative, all of those different things. How do you plan on support, well, the hBAR Foundation, but where do you kind of see those NFT paths I believe that you're still going to have a great artists out there doing great work, but then NFTs themselves represent, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, they could potentially be bigger than crypto assets at some point in time if you really delve into digital ID and things like that. Where do you see the NFT ecosystem growing in the next handful of years?
Yeah, so I think art-based NFTs, the evolution is that today you buy and you own the NFT and you're part of a cool community, which is awesome, right? We love to belong to things, and whether it's a sports team, whether it's what an artist that you follow, whatever. So owning the NFT integrates you more into that community. That's not going anywhere. But the next phase, I think, is that actual intellectual property rights, profit sharing, what you can do with your NFT, can you do derivative works, things like that. All of that will be baked into the NFT at the next phase. So if you're a musical artist and you release your music as an NFT, do the people that participate in that get future earnings rights, and what can they do? And all of this very complex legal stuff needs to go into the NFT, and we haven't even started that today. So that's kind of art-based. That's fantastic. Then the non-art-based stuff is really fascinating, right? Just take your car, for example. Your car is a non-fungible token, right? Your title, when you transfer your, what is it, pink slip in the States? What's it called?
Yeah,
not
title.
Pink slip. That's when you get
title.
fired.
Yeah.
Your title, it's that piece of paper transferring which transfers ownership of the car. I do believe that all these real world assets will be represented as NFTs, digital NFTs. And again, that transference is going to be so easy. Your house, title insurance, all that stuff is in the next wave of NFTs, I think, that's coming.
I'm going to try to finish the last couple minutes here with rapid fire. If you can rapid fire answer, that'd be great, because I want to get through some of the community questions. First, I've got a question asking, can you provide your opinion on what you think transactions per second would be at scale for Hedera?
At scale, oh my goodness. I mean, we're going to be...
I know it's it's like this big of a question.
I'll give you, like, in 5 years' time, I think we will be 10,000 transactions per second.
Okay. All right. Rapid fire again here. When will Hedera join the ISO 20022 club?
So if that needs to happen for anything, the HIP process, community members can write a HIP to become ISO compliant. We haven't seen it yet. We have not seen demand for it. I know it's kind of buzzy, but it's not a need from the governing council members. It's never come up. So yeah, if there are people out there that see that as a gap, just come and write that HIP.
All right. How many devs are building out dApps within Hedera without counting developers directly from Hedera or Swirlds, if you had to ballpark it right now?
Actively developing, I would say we're probably at 4,000 to 5,000 developers.
Okay. I've got a question here saying, when will V1 go live? When exactly will Atma.io go live? So that, let me try to read this, it's broken.
Okay, so V1, the code is already V1. There's a ton of testing going on behind the screens. Every time, behind the scenes, not screens, behind the scenes, every time there's an upgrade to the network, we're relentlessly testing. That label, the beta label, will come off, pretty soon, I think, in the next, maybe 6 months.
Okay.
And then Atma.io, they've said June. I hope they're right. That's all I'll say on that.
I think you already answered about staking. Or no, nodes, you answered it potentially end of the year. I think I might have one more here. Hang on one second. Told you I had a lot of questions. Two last things here, because I think we've tackled a bunch here. I put out a tweet probably about a month ago talking about, the Ripple lawsuit. I know it's not directly Hashgraph related, but I know you responded to it, basically stating that, you don't feel like anybody in this industry should be rooting against Ripple in that case. Can you maybe give like a 30 seconds about why you think that way?
Sure. If you are rooting for Ripple and XRP specifically to be deemed a security, you are putting this entire market in jeopardy. And that just seems weird to me, right? Why root against another project here? I do not get it. I know you're betting on your project, like your same, soccer team that you love, but that doesn't mean that you should bet against effectively something that could be a real threat to the entire industry and ruin your team at the same time. That doesn't seem right. So regardless of what you think about Ripple and XRP, we should all be rooting that at best, or at worst, there's some punitive actions on individuals, but XRP, gets a pass. Otherwise, the SEC is just going to go down the line, and whatever project you are supporting at a time is probably at risk as well.
My last question, I've got to give first off, I've got to give a shout out to Batty Hatties, because I told you
I love Batty Hattie. I nearly commented earlier.
Yeah, and I'm wearing the shirt today. But my last question, hBarbarian on Twitter initially asked for you to explain Hashgraph by only using interpretive dance, but he followed up.
I was practicing this.
But
see, that's Hashgraph.
He followed up that question. There was an announcement today from, it's called Project Guardian, coming out of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, testing digital assets along with DBS, who is a Hedera governing board member, Temasek, and JP Morgan. They're essentially going to be creating a permission liquidity pool made up of tokenized bonds, deposits, and also studying the introduction of regulatory safeguards into DeFi protocols to mitigate market manipulation. Does Hashgraph have anything to do with that? Was hBarbarian's question. So I'll close with that.
I genuinely do not know. I promise you I do not know. However, what I will say is Standard Bank has done a lot of pre-work looking at tokenized bond marketplaces. And that is an exciting area for tokenization in general, because bond markets today are completely opaque. They're completely closed. We as consumers cannot participate. They're like ruled by just a handful of giant players in the industry. So that one is ripe for tokenization. And regardless of that one, I do know Standard Bank is really, excited about that.
Awesome. Well, as always, Christian, and I think we have a ton of content within that hour. So we can't wait another 2 years to do another one of these. We've got to do.
I can't believe it's been 2 years.
It's been 2 years. Yeah. So as always, it's been a pleasure. I hope everybody that's listening to this, I hope this provided some value for you all. And again, Christian, thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. Hang out with me for 1 second, but I'm going to end the recording here for the audience. And just really appreciate the time. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.